Welcome to the Jarol SV channel. Today we will discuss three things. This will probably be the last film about the 4th set meta. I am slowly preparing materials about new decks from the 5th set. I will refer to the American Regional Qualifier, we will go through my ranking of the 10 best decks, and then we will thoroughly review my legion. This episode was supposed to be primarily about my legion set for meta, but I will briefly refer to the events from the American Regional Qualifier, apart from the fact that someone finally confirmed in practice my theoretical assumption that Kira without ECL has the potential to win the biggest tournaments and defeat everyone. We also had a controversial. The accusation against KTOD is that they deliberately did not play the semi-final with each other so that Kira would have a better matchup in the final. First of all, from what I understand, when they made this decision, it was not even known whether Ray or Kat would be in this final. The course of this matchup itself was certainly not a foregone conclusion, because I watched it and saw that if the Ray player had not made a mistake, he would probably have won. Secondly, while Kira definitely has a better matchup against Kat than Han, it is not so obvious against Ray, although in fact Kira probably does too. From my perspective, as long as the rules do not prohibit it and there was a question about the player's health, it's not reprehensible. It's just a game. The prizes for free entry to the top 8 were significant. Whoever gets the most from the players who entered the top 8 I don't think is the most important thing in the world. Of course, I know the health issues could be just an excuse, but we can't say that it definitely isn't. Personally, I don't see much sense in this theory because KTOD is already a highly regarded team and they had plenty of awards for top 8, top 4 and the final. This particular situation doesn't seem to me to be worth of stigmatization. A general discussion about strengthening the rules and the possibility of making some changes here makes more sense. If that's the case, I personally would prefer to eliminate such cases because they arouse unnecessary controversy. In the previous set I had a few discussions with Tork about Kira and I was surprised by his lack of understanding of the enormous potential of this deck. Today we already know who was right. It was summed up by my short, which I recently posted on my channel. Since it is not possible to cut it well in this format, here you have it more visible.
It's very hard to build a Kira, be able to beat aggro and beat Han at the same time, and beat the control decks at the same time. Like, it just is impossible to juggle all those different contradicted, and this is kind of been the story and the weakness of those kind of decks.
So wow, congratulations to Jarol, amazing victory.
Champion here in Star Wars Regional Qualifier here in Minneapolis.
Now let's move on to my ranking of the 10 best decks in the game at the moment. It results from the PQ season, the course of regionals and sectors that I followed closely and watched many broadcast games, and my own list of the best decks, which I will talk about in some detail after this ranking. It will allow you to better understand many of my choices in the ranking. Of course, I've tried to best decks here as objectively the most effective in tests, leagues and tournaments. A lot may depend on the meta, but apart from effective play in specific conditions, I also take into account the context of many matchups for each deck, which I tested the most in my league, where as many as 14 different decks played. First, we have decks that I decided to honor as potentially very strong but did not fit on the list due to the too many problematic matchups and therefore sufficiently convincing results. Palpatine is very strong in the age of matchups. The deck has a lot of potential and has already appeared in the top 8 many times. It is playable in all colors, however classic problems against aggro tempo decks and unsatisfactorily big problems against villain soft control decks like Kira or Vader limit its potential. Cat Tarkintown is not good enough against aggro in my opinion, because smart Sabine player will not allow losing a unit in the first turn to ping on Tarkintown, or already have a legendary Falcon ready for the second turn in the case of Sabine Yellow. I know that Cat Tarkintown reached the final and defeated Sabine in the quarterfinals, but there the Sabine player made exactly the same mistake and allowed his turn one play to be killed by Tarkintown in the first instead of pinging, and if Cat Bane passes take the initiative. Then it's usually enough to overwhelm the opponent on 4-5 resources and finish with ECL. Cat also won the semi-final against Ray due to the opponent's mistake of not killing Forlum. Quinlan, in my opinion, has too many problematic matchups. In most cases he is a slightly worse situation and functions practically only as a meta call. In my opinion, if all decks from this list played as often as he does, they would achieve similar or better results. Post Blue is probably the best deck in the game against all aggro. However, the matchup against many mid-ranges and controls is in my opinion negative, and it is too big minus to be on this tight list. In 10th place, Pietret. Strong against control and soft control, favorite against mid-ranges. The only very big problem seems to be aggro tempo decks. Overall, quite strong deck. In 9th place, I put two similar mid-range decks, one villain, the other hero. Cat Bane Data Vault has only one very big problem in case of soft control decks. Against hero soft control, he is favorite after sideboard. Against non-blue villain soft control decks, especially after side, he has a good chance thanks to yellow tricks. The worst matchup is Kira. Against hard control, he can also prepare quite solidly. Hand Data Vault is also a solid deck. It has the biggest problem against control, but defends itself with solid performances in various tournaments where it often managed to overcome some of the theoretical problems. In 8th place, Vader Yellow, really solid, troublesome for the opponent deck in almost all matchups. At the moment, I suppose that there are only two options to easily defeat this deck. Hard control to kill everything the opponent plays without major problems, or to simply kill him much faster with Yellow Sabin. Both of these options are quite rare, however, so they are not a big problem. Many decks have already adapted to Vader a bit, but it's still a tough opponent with solid results in various tournaments. Anakin Blue, solid deck with a good matchup against aggro, especially on Colossus, and solid potential to prepare for other matchups. Although even with the preparation against the best control players it cannot cope, which I consider a significant problem. However, it has a lot of advantages and is generally quite good against mid-ranges. The possibilities of solid preparation and numerous advantages give it considerable success in the tournaments, which give it 7th place. 6th place, Vader Data Vault. Strong in most matchups. Why not lower? He is very solid against Kira, which is now one of the main challenges of the meta. He probably wins against all aggro decks except Sabin and Anakin, but even with them he is about 50-50. When prepared against hard control, you can say almost the same about villain decks. So why is he not higher? Against very space decks like Vader Yellow, Pietro, or Yellow Sabin, he has little chance even with a lot of preparation. And generally, even in standard matchups, sometimes it is too easy to kill him with space or a lot of aggression. The fact that the matchup for Green Sabine has been normalized does not mean that Vader is now always able to stop aggro. In 5th place is Han Green, a solid deck with new possibilities, fast attack in space or classic very strong game plan with fast access to 7 resources. Of course, it is still not an ideal deck, nor the best deck in the game even when it draws perfectly, because soft control exists. Heavy control without specific preparations such as free waylays without DJ also seems to be a potentially problematic matchup. Against aggro, Han is also not easy, but the general wide potential of the deck in all matchups and the good results give it 5th place here. In 4th place, Wet Yellow, the only deck on this list that is very little known and not represented at all in larger tournaments. Despite this, it is simply too strong in matchups for all decks on this list. Deck expert in destroying Sabin, Han and Quinlan, solid play against other decks, maybe with the exception of Vader Yellow, although there are some chances here too. In 3rd place, Blue-Green Hero, Ray or Yoda Data Vault. Personally, I prefer Yoda because he is stronger in long games. When you get to his turn, unlike Ray's turn, there is no chance to lose a game on aggro except for exceptional situation, and there is a small chance that you will lose against midrange. But I know that Ray Data Vault is more popular and more importantly, it won 7 PQ and played solidly at the largest tournaments, so it shows us the strength on this archetype. What's more, the matchup analysis and my leech also show it. The only things that stop this archetype from fighting for the first position is the naturally weak matchup against villains of control. Of course, this matchup can be improved a bit, but the opponent is always the favorite in this case. In second place is Sabine, as depending on the meta, Sabine green or yellow. Yellow is better against yellow Vader, yellow Gar Saxon, more reliable against Quinlan. Green is better against Hantu blue and post blue. Is usually a bit more dangerous against the blue-green hero decks. Both versions are quite strong against other aggro, especially the yellow version. Strong against mid-ranges, they have a solid game against control. Especially Sabine ECL has been generating great results for several sets, so I think that despite some problems, this is a fairly well-deserved position. In first place is Kira. The deck is simply the favorite in every matchup excluding maybe Palpatine, but even this matchup is become more and more winnable. Very flexible deck. To win the biggest tournament you have to practice many matchups, know your game plan and potential threats, but then it becomes very dangerous, especially when you do not make significant mistakes. Therefore, I have no doubt that this is the best deck, and its results in this set confirm it, and even when they did not confirm in the previous set, because people most often did not play this deck or played insufficiently versatile version on ECL. In the fourth set, this deck was improved a bit, no glory only results, but in fact this is the only important change compared to the previous set. Decks that were neither in the top 10 nor in honors and sometimes perform well in PQ. Hantu ECL compared to Sabin is simply a less dangerous version of the same deck, although he has some matchups in which he is better than Sabin, so maybe he should simply be together with Sabin ECL and Yellow in second place. Unfortunately, I know few exceptions in this deck compared to the others, so you can correct me in the comments and generally write your rankings. Poe at the moment he is simply a weaker Sabin. Situations in which Poe is better than Sabin are very rare, in my opinion. Generally, Sabin is much more reliable. Gar Saxon is too weak against control. I have no idea how this deck would win with any control. Kazuda is a bit better in this respect, but still terrible in my tests. Kira eats them both, and even one of the strongest representativeness of control, Vader Data Vult, also win here easily. So now moving on to my Lich. The main rules of the Lich are that each deck plays with each best of 3 or best of 5, and that because I play it practically alone in order to get the most reliable results, I look for the best possible moves. If I understood somewhere that I made a mistake, if it mattered, I went back to that situation or repeat the game. If the best of 3 was very even, I extended it to best of 5. I even wanted to increase the reliability of this Lich compared to the version from the previous set. There is no hard control here because I probably prematurely decided that it is now even more controllable. Besides, I made this decision before the bans when, for example, Han Yellow seems to be a strong counter against hard control. And in general, the whole league could lose a bit on bounce because I was already too far into retreat, so I played with Django, Han Yellow, with DJ, and in most decks a few cards to exchange in the meta without Django and DJ. The participation of hard control could be slightly exchange the results, but I will include in the discussion. Now let's move on to the discussing the table and drawing conclusions from the last to the first deck. Quinlan once again disappointed in the previous edition of the Lich with a balance of 0-11. This time he scored one win against Anakin, taking advantage of the fact that Colossus plays. In my opinion, the second such poor result cannot be accidental. Quinlan turns out when he has to face so many different decks, not as a meta call for several decks, he is not the favorite in most matchups. Against control he loses if the discard plan doesn't work. Against aggro he also usually loses if the opponent cleverly plays around pinks. So it seems that this deck is not suitable for fighting against a wide range of decks when the opponent does not make mistakes. It seems like this deck has to be some kind of meta call prepared solidly for several decks. It seems like the same can be said about Anakin, except that he has a generally good matchup against aggro, which is where his only win came from. However, when it comes to other matchups, its Bet and Colossus doesn't help in them, but currently both versions are playing. The one without Colossus would have more potential to perform well against such a wide range of decks. Now we have 3 places with the same results of 5-8. The order was decided by the tiled balance calculated from every single game that the deck played. Now we have 4 places with the same result of 5-8. The order was decided by the tiled balance calculated from every single game that the deck played. In contrast to the very weak vacancies of the two previous decks, I consider 5-8 against so many decks not so bad, average. Far from a great success, but acceptable, especially since in practice at any tournament you don't have a chance to play with such a wide range of different decks. This means that these decks can be good for a specific meta, although the result also indicates that it's definitely not for everyone. Cat Bane has a very specific problem: control in almost every form. In this league we had Vader, Palpatine, Yoda, Piet, Kira, Anakin. With Anakin and Piet, Cat Bane managed to win 2-1, although with difficulty, but lost easily. Apart from control, aggro also starts to be a problem for this deck. Cat Bane is currently losing to Sabine, and here it was in two versions. It also failed against Wedge, although in this case it was decided only by best of 5 to 3. In my opinion, such numerous and large problems show that Cat Bane Data Vault is currently a better choice than Tarkington. Sabine ECL surprised negatively in this edition because in the previous one she was in the lead. Partly the deck was unlucky because it lost theoretically solid matchups against Piet and Vader. Even in worse matchups such as Yoda or Kira, Sabine always lost after a fight 1-2. The fact that she lost to Wedge or Boba Data Vault does not matter that much because these decks are not in the meta now. Sabine ECL is still one of the best decks. Consider it completely unplayable, the meta would have to consist of only Anakin, Yoda, Kira and Wedge. Palpatine for the second time in a row has simply an average result in the league. Too much aggro, too much trouble against some other controls due to the one less cards from the Colossus and the increase in Vader and Kira. Both of these decks went from being a bad matchup to 2-1 now. Palpatine Data Vault is probably the sensible version now. Now we have Han Yellow and Piet Yellow. I was hoping for more in the case of both decks. Han Yellow failed against aggro this season, he lost to Sabines, Wedge and Django. In addition, of course, it is not an ideal deck for everything else, so he had 3 more failures and hence this result. It seems that Han Yellow is not currently a tier 1 deck, but this information probably does not surprise anyone anymore. Apart from that, this meta did not particularly favor him. Piet did not completely work out against aggro because he managed to win against Green Sabine, but in other matchups he also performed averagely. He lost to Vader with Kira, unexpectedly he lost to Cat. Palpatine turned out to be a terrible matchup for him, so I think that Piet Yellow is fairly an average deck. It is not bad in the right meta, it can be dangerous, but in general it is not able to cope with some problems, sometimes it can disappoint badly. Boba Green finished with 7-6. This deck was supposed to resemble the ideal midrange to win on aggro and have a good chance against control. In practice, however, it went badly, especially with soft controls. It is a good deck, of course, especially in some meta for it, but it is also not a universal power for everything and can get into various problems. Now we have 4 decks with 8-5, which is a very solid result for such a wide range of opponents in order from the last. Wedge, apart from being unable to win on Django, has problems against Blue Hero with bases above 30, a tough challenge against Kira. The defeat against Boba Data Vault also shows that midrange with stroke space defense can cause him problems. Nevertheless, many other good matchups show that this deck is strong. In the classification without Django, it would be even a little higher. Yoda shows that a good matchup against aggro and a solid one against midrange is a pretty good arrangement, even despite the weakness against wheel and control. Against such decks, Yoda loses 4 times, and once against Han without DJ, this matchup can be a little better, although still bad. So this is of course a deck that depends a lot on the state of the meta. On aggro, midrange meta can be very strong, but when there is a lot of wheel and soft control in it, it will have big problems. Soft control because hard is beatable, especially when you play restocks. Vader Data Vault presented itself solidly, lost to Django, but it doesn't matter. He lost a close game to Han. Without DJs, he might even have won. With Sabine Yellow and Wedge, he has a small chance, but these decks are not popular. The only thing that could hurt more in the current meta is Kira, but this defeat was very close and was against Kira on 30, which had more consistency. Against the version Data Vault, my result in TTI in 2 best of 3 is 4-1. All this leads to the conclusion that Vader Data Vault is well positioned in the current meta and can be very strong. Kira is a bit more consistent than Vader because she has a much better matchup against Sabin, but she can dissolve in control mirrors, draws or 0-1 losses. As I said in my deck tag about Vader, a matchup against Sabin is currently acceptable because it's about 50-50. Yellow Sabin proves that it's still a strong deck against a wide range of decks, probably even better than green. She lost to Django, which doesn't matter, she may have problems with some soft controls, she lost to Kira, Anakin and Yoda, but even these matchups can sometimes be won. I know this because I've playing this deck since the first set. Losing to Wedge is not a big problem because Wedge still, to my surprise, hasn't broken through in the meta. In the current situation, Sabin Yellow is another interesting option, especially with a limited number of soft and hard controls. In second place, of course, Django, already banned for how powerful and easy to play in most matchups he was. Due to the simple game plan, people played him like crazy, unlike the first place, which, although better on paper, is difficult and complicated to play. Django lost only to Yoda and Boba in the data vault. They are the best options for Django from the whole list. In the first place, again Kira, with a balance of 12-1. One defeat was Django, there was a lot of bad luck in it, and a lot of 12 damage from Juggernaut popping up out of nowhere. My version of Kira did well in the Django meta, but only when Django started playing Devastators instead of Fire Spray, and this version of Django, as you can see, plays Fire Spray. Devastator, although potentially very dangerous, usually appears too late when the game was practically decided in Kira's favor. Kira won many matchups easily, but there were also a few close and complicated ones like Piet or Vader Data Vault. So Kira is simply still the best deck in the game since Boba ban, but the difficulty of long games, some very complicated matchups, and people's tendency to hard their chances by playing any other base than 30 limit it from complete domination. Here is the leech table excluding Django. As we can see, the changes are not big, but they hit Yoda and Boba slightly and reward other decks a little more. I decided to finally collect all the most interesting conclusions that can be drawn from this edition of the leech. Kira is the strongest deck in the game. No matter how you look at it, it definitely has the widest possibilities of defeating all decks in the game, the ability to easily trade with the opponent's leader, a strong deck capable of shorter, longer and extremely longest games, great power. Finding problems for this deck means looking for some strange meta calls that would have a low chance of facing other decks in whatever meta it is. Sabin Yellow and Wedge are underrated, strong aggro decks which is in the right meta can be very powerful. It is worth practicing slightly worse matchups against blue hero decks with bases above 30 and against soft and hard control when playing these decks. Vader Data Vault in my soft control version is also a very powerful and overlooked deck. Matchup against aggro to practice the rest is positive. Yoda is also a strong soft control option, especially if Villain's soft control starts to withdraw from the meta. With Quinlan and Anakin can be very unreliable in many matchups and they have to be thoughtfully built for a given meta. Anakin has to play 30 or a very large number of card generators. Cat Bane at this point makes more sense on Data Vault or from Lake Country than on Tarkin Town because the Tarkin Town version is no longer good enough against aggro. Palpatine and Colossus gain a lot against aggro, but still too little, and besides he becomes too shaky against other controls and mid-ranges. That's why at the point the best version of Palpatine is the Data Vault version. Hell Yellow is no longer a strong enough deck because of the problems against aggro and against control. Sabin ECL is the most controllable, more about that in my last video on the channel. So that's it for today. Leave a like and subscribe. See you in a week in the next video, probably about decks from set 4. Bye.